GTO LAB, coaching for the next generation of MTT champions. Join our live webinars covering GTO, ICM, PKOs, exploits, deep stack concepts, and more. Train with the greatest minds in live and online poker. Join GTO LAB today and get weekly coaching and full access to our #1 ICM trainer.
Part of becoming a great poker player is taking all those ingredients, the solver says this and your instincts say this, dump that all in the blender and you come out with the right answer.
I'm making the sickest call with ace high right now. This has to be a bluff. Kind of want to do it.
And is relieved to see that Hawk has queen high.
Gentlemen, who's the best?
How you devoted this energy, how you approached trying to get to sleep, everything around a deep run in the main event.
By day 7, I sit down and I play hand 1 and I'm like, oh my God, I'm exhausted today. This is going to be a motherfucking problem. True A-game poker, nothing outside of the table exists. Probably the #1 reason why I do the Triton commentary. I kind of do it just to go and get paid to study poker so that I stay sharp. My lazy ass does not study enough on my own. People used to think I was crazy. The thing that I did that was way ahead of the curve is this.
Brian Rast, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here, John. I'm looking forward to it.
So I think people know you in very different capacities based on what their experience with poker is and where in the game they came along. There's got to be someone watching right now who's like, hey, I wonder why Jaffe had the Triton commentator on. That's pretty cool, but interesting. And yet, my angle is this. Brian Rast is the most broad man in poker. Nobody has done more things. We can start with kind of the summary accolade, which is you're the youngest guy in the Poker Hall of Fame. And some of the reasons for that, you've been an online professional. You've been a live cash professional, both public games, private games. You've been a high stakes live tournament professional. Everything that is poker adjacent, you've been a part of. Bitcoin and crypto got so associated with poker, and you've been, a Bitcoin evangelist, a very successful investor. Please don't kidnap Brian. He's a great guy. And you, prop betting, we'll get to that, but I mean, that's one of the associations with poker. You've been very involved in props before, and to my knowledge, rather successful. And now a commentator. Everything that you could do in the poker world. Mixed games. I forgot big mixed games. I mean, I guess that goes with live cash, but you've won the PPC twice, the Poker Players Championship. You won the Super High Roller Bowl the year it was a 500K, and
three times. I won
three times the PPC?
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Yeah. I'm a bad researcher. But yeah, I mean, close to 30 million in winnings. I can't think of someone as a player, Ike is incredibly broad, but, when I think about this commentator part and the prop betting and the Bitcoin, just everything related to the poker world, Brian Rast has been involved in. So sorry to make you sit through all your accolades. I usually don't do this to my guests, but I think that given that right now you haven't been playing high stakes tournaments or been on the high stakes cash shows, there's probably a few kind of new people to poker who are like, oh yeah, Rast, I heard he's a legend. He's a Hall of Famer. What did he do?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you. I appreciate all the kind words. I would say about the cash game thing, I don't want to say I've never played private games, but it's a vanishingly small part of my cash career. I basically only really played live cash. In fact, I've probably played private games more in the last year than I ever did prior to the Poker Hall of Fame induction almost. I really the only one is a couple times in Macau I got in Paul's game, when I was there. But I would go over to Macau basically to play the win game. And just maybe I'd be there for 3 weeks and I'd get to play in Paul's game once or twice when they needed a player because Paul was cool with me. And then also you missed sit and goes. I wasn't a big sit and go guy, but I basically played when I was starting to play more and more tournaments. I was like, hey, I really should try to learn some ICM concepts and how it applies. And I thought the best way to kind of do this, because I was learning by doing. So because of that, I really liked poker more. Listen, I've gotten used to it and I appreciate solvers, but I like poker more before solvers because I like just playing, thinking deeply about what I was doing, applying the concepts. I mean, I think obviously that worked out really well for me because I was playing the highest of everything before solvers came around and like beating every single facet of poker. But in order to get good at ICM spots, I would play hyper sit and goes, which, they pretty quickly got to push fold spots because you would get short. And so you could run push fold spots super quickly in like little ICM calcs, which I would do like, when I was done with a session or between sit and goes. And somebody who's actually crushing it today, who I played quite a bit with during that period, was Devoris. And I probably played less than 1,000 hyper sit and goes. I played the biggest ones on like stars or whatever. And I actually won over that sample size. And it helped me learn ICM quite a bit. I probably did this around 2014 or 15, right as the ARIA tournament stuff started kicking off. And I actually started playing more tournament volume than I ever had before. But so, yeah.
Nice. Let me ask you a question. There's a couple questions kind of coming to mind for me around that. One, you and I had lunch in Montenegro, and we kind of discussed coming from the same point of view of really having an appreciation for solvers and for what's going on today and what you need to get great, but really kind of loving the game pre-solver a lot more. And I think, I don't want to put too many words in your mouth, but for me, I love that first 10% when it's chaos and no one knows, and there's very different varying strategies floating around, and you're just trying to figure it out on the fly. Nobody's going to be anywhere close to perfect, and you're just trying to be less imperfect than your opponents. I'm kind of thinking about how the window has closed on that sort of poker when it comes to Texas Hold'em.
Jonathan, briefly, can I stop you real fast? Because I want to reinforce something you just said. I have long believed, because I play a lot of different games, right? I believe a game is better when more people, even good players, are playing different strategies, right? It's a sign that the game is better, because obviously that means more people are actually probably playing somewhat incorrectly or whatever. Well, also means there's a lot more ways that you can adjust to the different people playing the game. And so just to summarize, obviously this changes because the more people have like a GTO strategy to emulate that's clearly kind of the right way to play, the more strategies end up converging. I'm not saying there isn't room, but like, especially on level 1 now, where people are like, this is the VPIP opening range for, RFI. It's like everyone who's any good kind of plays almost the same in those spots. Maybe like later, node 1, 2, 3 start diverging, but like it's a lot more similar.
This broad career that you've had, and kind of a question about identity and how much you think about your identity wearing these different hats as you have, from online player to live player, from cash player to tourney player, even commentator. Do you notice any kind of identity shift, any shift in what you take pride in through these kind of different periods in your career?
It's actually a great question. And yes, I can tell you the biggest one, the one that immediately, as you're asking the question, I think of. And it's sort of the shift that happened basically like during COVID. And what happened is I think if you go back before COVID, especially if you were to go back to kind of almost like pre or during very early solver days, like I was literally, looking back, I think up until maybe 2016, I was playing all the biggest no limit hold'em tournaments. And I think I had like really high EV in them, even with all the best players that were playing. At some point that started to shifting. I knew guys who were studying solvers a bunch as it started and was talking poker with one of them. Like Jason Kuhn is like my personal example. And I can tell you that like from before he started studying solvers a bunch, I would talk poker with him. And then I could see the difference is like I would talk some poker with him as he was studying a whole lot with the group of guys that he worked with. And whenever we'd have a conversation a year after, 2 years after, all of a sudden it was a very different conversation, and I'm like, holy shit, like Jason's getting way better at poker. Actually, it's like, to be very frank on my personal evaluation, it's like I started and I'm like, okay, I think I'm better at tournament poker than Jason Kuhn, even though he's a good player. Sure. As this process started, pretty soon it's like, okay, Jason Kuhn's a better tournament poker player than me. He's working really hard, God bless him, and it's fucking paying off. So, it's like, but it was fine. Like, I would still, even after some of that was happening, I think I could compete at the highest level in No Limit. I was playing the biggest cash games. I was playing Bobby's Room. And I pretty much had developed this kind of identity of like, I'm one of the best live poker players in the world. I'll compete with anybody in a ring format, not heads up, in pretty much any type of game situation that's going to run, and take my shot. And by COVID, the tournament stuff had started to fade some because so many people were getting good. But then COVID really was the transition where like I didn't play poker at all during COVID. And so by the time COVID was done, it was kind of like, oh, wow, things are different. And some of what had already started before COVID sank in. And it was like this moment where it's like, okay, my identity is like, I'm one of the best, arguably best, whatever you wanted to say for that period, all around live poker players in the world. Like, that's not really probably what's going on anymore. I'm still like a great poker player, but like things have changed a bit, and definitely didn't help taking a year and a half off during COVID. Right.
Sure.
So that was a huge identity shift for me because, I just know like my thinking before that is like, I love, playing poker. I think I'm going to always and I always going to play poker, but just this identity that I'm always going to compete in all the biggest poker stuff, like that shifted. And that was kind of weird for a little bit, but I think one of the things as a gambler is, and I'm pretty good at this, and I think like all truly great gamblers kind of need to be, is like, you need to have like very honest self-reflection, because if you're not honest, at some point you start getting in minus EV spots or not taking enough plus EV spots, right? If you're overconfident, or arrogant versus like being too scared or whatever. And so, that was a big identity shift for me. That was probably the number one, because I'd say like stuff prior to that early in my career. Yeah, sure. I probably thought I was a little bit better than I was too soon early on. But like, I think actually as a young person, it's coming up in poker, it's probably good to be like slightly, like I wasn't bad, but it's being slightly overconfident. It like kind of lets you take shots. And I was able to balance that off early in my career by like, I was very responsible with my like piece selling and whatever when I would do my shot taking and play in big games. So like I never went broke or anything like that. But like that wasn't a massive identity shift. That was probably the biggest one, which you kind of talked about this in your intro, but it's like, yeah, I kind of really changed, where I was. And, it's actually one of the reasons why I do, probably the number one reason why I do the Triton commentary. I don't really do it for the money, although it's nice to get paid. It's kind of a hassle traveling, even though some of the spots, like I really enjoyed actually Monte Carlo. Or no. What was Montenegro? Yeah, that was my favorite.
Beautiful. That's my favorite too.
But it's like,
I love Montenegro.
I kind of do it just to go and like get paid to study poker so that I stay sharp, because my lazy ass does not study enough on my own. And it's like, I like staying good at poker. It's like, even if I'm not, I feel like relatively as good as I was 10 years ago, it's like, I still love competing. And I'm going to compete at poker for the rest of my life. And it's like, I want to do things. I want to kind of like hardwire my life in the right ways so that even without doing maybe as much work as I could, I still remain really good and competitive. And I do think the Triton commentary is kind of like a hack for that. It's like I'm getting paid to go somewhere, watch the best players in the world, and like break down what they're doing in an environment where, like theoretically I could do this at home, but the odds of me sitting and watching a poker, like I never watched poker, watching a poker stream with intense focus for like 6 hours straight are pretty close to zero. But having to do it live on air, just requires a different level of focus and attention. So I don't know. That's like a very long way to answer your question. Hope you got something out of that.
Yeah, I did. Think how I want to phrase this. People who've started way before the solver era and got really good kind of necessarily learn to trust their instincts. And sometimes instincts actually become conscious knowledge as you get older. You can kind of translate it a little bit, but even some of it never really gets translated, and you just say like, I don't know. I can't exactly explain it, but I don't think I want to call here. And a lot of the new school players who are really well studied and don't have, a ton of experience pre-solver era or maybe any experience, they can feel a little handcuffed by some of what they've studied. And it can take a while to either build the instincts or trust going off script a little bit. But the challenge for pre-solver guys like me and you would be when to, say, hey, look, my instincts are acclimated to a different era, and this no longer really applies to this player pool that has studied very different things. So my question is, how do you separate instinct from bias? How do you kind of navigate that internal thought process when you're feeling one thing, but trying to decide if your instincts are really calibrated to the situation or if this is just residual bias?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. And I think there's like a lot to really unpack here. I'm going to give another long-winded answer, but I'm going to start with an example. This is an example that beat this into me. I remember it very clearly, which is very odd considering it wasn't really that big of a hand, but it just stood out to me. So I played, it was the last $1 million I played. It might have been in 17 or 8, maybe it was 18. I was able to find out the hand because I think I ended up being at the televised table on day one, whatever, when I bought in. And I played some small pot versus Nick Petrangelo. It might have been blind versus blind, where I ended up making a really big fold on the river in a spot with like top pair, where my instinct was based on the fact that like probably for the last 7 years, it's kind of just one of these criminally underbluff spots where you just get to make big folds to people. Mm-hmm. When I ended up finding out that when he bluffed me, I ended up like searing into my mind that against really good players nowadays in spots like this, I just can't kind of like make these population reads anymore, because people are just going to be studied enough that there's like no way you can kind of like make huge folds like that. At least like without some kind, like I didn't do it based off a live read.
Yeah.
Right? That he's weak or something like that. It was just based off of kind of the card sense of like how people had been playing. And it's just like, that's changing. So that's why I brought this up, because it's very pertinent to the thing I think you said, which is like, when do your instincts lead you wrong in these kind of spots? So, I think it can definitely happen. And I think there's some amount of training that has to go into doing that. But it's a really interesting question of balance as well, because like one thing that I found also as I would learn more and more GTO stuff and solver outputs is like, when do I start, like when on the other side of that coin, is it that I start letting this knowledge about like what I'm supposed to do in a spot, like kind of just railroad me off my instincts, which I've honed over a very long time. And then I'm like ignoring and end up missing a good play that I kind of feel is right. And I mean, I think the only way to answer this question is there's no easy answer. The truth is that it's like part of becoming a great poker player is taking all those ingredients of like the solver says this and your instincts say this, and do you have a live read, and like how's this guy been playing, and is he tilting, or anything, any kind of dynamics developing. You dump that all in the blender, you fucking mix it up, and you come out with the right answer. And it's like, you've got to use all your knowledge and intuition in order to figure that out. And there isn't an easy way to do it, Mm-hmm. And you just have to be aware of, let's call it these different pitfalls. The pitfall of, is my brain telling me this, but this is really just because I'm used to some exploit that doesn't exist, especially not with somebody of this type anymore. Or it's like, is this a spot where this exploit actually works against this player for XYZ reason? And you just got to figure that out. That's why poker is a fucking beautiful, tough game.
Yeah. It's tough. I kind of love that war that goes on in my brain, and you're trying to like figure out what are these cues that are more in line with doing what I want to do, and which ones are, more in line with rigor and kind of trying to actually suss out the right answer. It's tough sometimes because I think your brain, often deceives you, because in the end, we want to do what we want to do.
Yeah. So it's fun. I mean, that's the fun of competing at poker. And, it is something that I've learned to appreciate playing more and more. Now, I think like there was a time period I was a lot more bitter about the changes about solvers, but then it's like, life is what it is, man. Like things change and you move on. And now I've learned to start appreciating some of these things, which is like, sure, solvers do make some things more conformity, and it's definitely changed previous population exploits and things that were true, but it's created new ones, right? Like new ones where, players go to the first street very well, but then like the nodes that come from that, they don't do very well or whatever. And it's just all about continuing to learn and grow and like just appreciating things the way they are. Like, would I say for me subjectively, do I still kind of like the old style more? Yes. And the reason why, from let's call it my objective, subjective standpoint, or however you'd want to call it, subjective, objective standpoint, is like, I like a game more where more people are going to be taking very different strategies. That's going to happen when you don't have an answer coming from somewhere. That allows you to do way more wild exploits and adaptations within game. And it also just kind of means that to a certain extent, the problem solving that is happening is coming from you yourself and not something that you're like learning more of in another area. And I just like loved that journey. And I mean, like, I really believe fundamentally that like prior to solvers, when you were a world-class poker player, you didn't learn shit in the public environment other than like, listen, I'd watch some run it once videos or like whatever, but it was mostly just to see what people thought. Like, oh, this is group. Like, I think if you go back pre-solvers, there's stuff that all the really good players were doing, or not all of them, but like some really good players would each have their own little things that they had hacked. And like later it would be borne out that they were just fucking ahead of the curve. Right. Yeah. So it's like not stuff that I did. Like I remember back in the day, and I always thought these were the toughest guys to deal with. And there weren't that many of them, but the guy like Prahlad Friedman, and there were others who would just do the 3x over betting on the river like 15, 20 years ago. Not that many people were really doing that. And to be honest, I never incorporated it in my game because for the most part, up to pot kind of betting, like I had a really good like vibe on how to deal with different people with the like half pot to like 1.2x pot range. So I never really felt like I needed it. But for me personally, dealing with other people, I fucking hated dealing with people that overbet the river. And luckily there weren't that many. The thing that I did that was like way ahead of the curve is this. People used to think I was like crazy. And most of it came down to I would just show up in pots with like hands that people thought were really bad. But most of the reason I did it was this. It's like I'd open in like late position or whatever, or sometimes flat somebody with bad hands, right? Like hands that a solver wouldn't play today, or even hands that the solver would play today. But it's like back in the day, like people used to like 2.5x 3-bet like out of the small blind heads up. And I'd be in a tournament, we'd be like 60 or 80 blinds deep. And a couple times I'd put this, I don't know if I forget what thing this is online, but they have some application where you can look at a graph. And like, this is a very simple level of sign. I'm not trying to say this is, but it's like, you look at a graph, you put in like how, on what percent of flops, how does like 7-8 suited or like Jack-9 suited flop equity versus ace-king or aces or some of these hands that people are 3-betting with. And I look at it and be like, oh, it's not that bad. Like I'm getting a good price here. I'm in position. And people used to also have pretty simplistic post-flop strategies where they'd c-bet always as the 3-better and then tell you where they were on the turn. So if you have anything going on, you just float and figure it out later. And it's like, I used to be like, I'm trying to even think who it is. Like you look at a guy like Adamo or Foxen, and it's just like they always have this day one huge, massive chip lead. And I used to be one of the guys that just always had this huge chip lead on day one. And it was because this was like probably, if I'm looking back and analyzing it, like my biggest hack was just I'd play some hands, like not like being super crazy, but then I just never folded to these tiny 3-bets.
Yeah.
And I think I was just printing, but no one else really did that. So
I think that was a big difference maker was how you responded to 3-bet. I think there were a lot of people who were kind of the rudimentary understanding. If you're behind their range, you probably need to fold, or something close to that. They say like it was very normal, I think, for even high level pros to just open ace jack in the cutoff and fold to a button 3-bet at like all depths. I remember getting like just roasted by people for calling ace 10-0 in that spot. They were just like, wow, Jaffe just has no discipline. And I kind of didn't, but also I was like, I don't know, it just seems right. I can't really explain it, but it seems like it makes money. I used to flat king 5 suited on the button versus opens, and people just thought I was a complete whale for doing that. Kind of turned out to be pretty normal. But yeah, I think back in the day, it was a very simple understanding of how does your hand match up versus their hand. 64-36, don't call, something like that. It was just pretty crazy. Board coverage was not really a term.
Yeah. So, it's just real fun. And so anyway, I just think back in the day, it was like poker was just, once you kind of got to, there wasn't much for you to learn. It was more about just thinking through all the spots. Like I'd go play, you think through some spots that you got in really deeply, maybe for something that was interesting, you talk to a friend about it. And you think like more than anything, it was about, okay, like how am I going to incorporate this into my range or my style of playing? And another thing that was so big back in the day is like the battle of adjustments. Like, I think one of the things that like really good players do, they even do to this day, is it's like the pre-adjustment. It's like you adjust before, right? So it's like you're one step ahead of them. Like, you correctly suss out what they're thinking about what you're doing, and you pre-adjust to it. So you're like matching their adjustment as it happens, right? So
you used the term earlier, and we actually we almost named the company, instead of GTO Lab, we were almost ahead of the curve. I think we might even have like domain name rights on ahead of the curve. And that was a phrase I'd been using 15 years ago. It was always just like try to figure out what the next iteration is going to be, both in the population and in specific opponents. And I think that's kind of one of the fun challenges that you'll see the different study groups for the highest level players working on. I think maybe the small pool, high stakes online cash game guys were kind of the first to that. It was so valuable and important to kind of understand the approach that individual opponents had. And then, that just kind of trickled out to all the high stakes games.
Yeah, for sure.
So again, back to this kind of concept of you being so broad in poker and adjacent spheres. You've had run-ins, are friends with, acquaintances with a lot of really impressive, intelligent people in a lot of different walks of life. And one of the things that I kind of think of as this modern challenge for all of us, even if you aren't connected to really intelligent people, just being able to read them, is the balance between being a free-thinking person who, no doubt, you're a very intelligent guy, tries to figure things out for himself and take all the data and information on a subject, whether it's politics or crypto, poker too, but usually more complex issues like how you think the economy should be run, for example. I'm wondering how you approach this balance when you decide that you want to have a stance on an issue, whether it's because it's important to you and your investments, such as crypto, or whether it's just, hey, I want to be educated for the presidential election and know who I want to vote for. I don't want to get into politics, but I'm more so wondering how you balance aggregating opinions from really intelligent people that are more knowledgeable than you in a given field. But you don't, most of us don't just 100% say, oh, this guy's smarter than me on this, I will take his opinion. There's some sort of balance between weighting his opinion very heavily and then, doing your own research to take kind of, some of the phrasing of today. Do you know what I'm getting at here?
Yeah. So I think that in life, there are, facts that we look at or things that we try to consider more objective about the world around us. We're all going to interpret them differently because ultimately we come from a place where people have different values that are usually, there's some similarity, but like different hierarchies of these values for different people. Therefore, the interpretation of the facts, I want to use that word not too strongly,
sure,
or whatever the kind of reality that we're looking at ends up, being different to different people, and that's okay. And I think that's an important thing when you're maybe, talking to a person who you think is like smart or educated about a topic, is also to realize that that doesn't necessarily mean that their interpretation or valuation of what's going on will be the same as yours. I think other things that are important along the lines of what you're talking about are kind of like, you have to be curious. I think that's a really good quality in a person. Is it's like there's so much, the more you learn in life, the more you realize how little you actually really know. And more than that, it's the more you realize how much you've learned and forgotten, right? It's like, I feel like I've forgotten most of the stuff I've learned in my life, right?
Same.
And so they're very humbling things to realize, but then, I just think curiosity is super important for a person to continue learning and growing in your life. I feel like whenever you're not learning and growing, you're stagnating in anything. I mean, it's applicable in poker. It's applicable in a bunch of things. So I think that's a very important quality. I also think a very important quality for me, and I think for most people, is you shouldn't really care what most people think. So I give my opinions sometimes publicly on Twitter. And the truth is I kind of mostly don't care what people think of, I feel, I give opinions like on Twitter of various levels of, let's call it, expertise. Some things I talk about, I've spent a lot of time thinking about and developing like very granulated opinions. Let's call it, one of the things I tweet about the most that I feel like this would be like Bitcoin. Right. Like I've spent a lot of time studying this and reading opinions and everything. And I feel almost like an expert, maybe not on the technical aspect of Bitcoin. I'm not a computer programmer, but on like the valuing or investment aspect of it and, how that plays out. So, again, interpretations of it are going to be different from person to person, but I feel like I've spent a lot of time on this. There will be other things that I tweet about that I definitely haven't spent as much time. But then again, I don't really care what people think. I have an opinion. One of the things I like doing on Twitter is sometimes I throw an idea out or opinion that I kind of have, even on a controversial topic. And sometimes I get feedback that, lets me consider something from an opposing argument, or someone will respond with, something interesting to watch. And it'll help me almost through like a dialectic process formulate my idea and sharpen my idea even better than the one that I had previously held, right? So that process of starting a conversation helps. So, and that doesn't have to just be on Twitter. It can also obviously be with people in private and conversations and whatever. So I enjoy learning, and actually it's a sign to me. I feel like I go through waves personally, where I go through a moment where I'm enjoying watching documentaries and books and doing it a lot. And then I kind of peter out, and more of my time doing this type of thing will be spent watching, let's call it, playing video games or watching programs which aren't as educational, but more for entertainment purposes. Mm-hmm. I'm doing that a little bit too much. I'm like, kind of feel this itch, like I got to learn something, like what's going on? Like, and then, so it's kind of like comes and goes in waves.
You mentioned the importance of curiosity, which comes more and less naturally to different people. Do you have any tips for how to cultivate curiosity?
It's a good question, and I don't really have any tips that come to me. So no, but sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think about it with regard to poker. We talked about it. You and I were both somewhat reluctant to work with solvers. Both had varying levels of frustration or bitterness towards the idea that the game was moving in that direction. But, you either get with the times or get out. But Nick Petrangelo said to me, years ago, that I was going to have to learn to like it, love it, to actually do it, that it wasn't going to happen, without that. And I think aside from, people who have very heavy financial pressure and this is their only way to support their family, you do kind of have to learn to like it or love it to kind of get really good at anything or really educated about anything. And yeah, I just think about that. I don't have any tips that come to mind right away for me either, but it seems like that's kind of the key, is something to spark your curiosity more than just maybe financial motivation.
Yeah, I think there is something to be said, especially more and more in the modern day, about being able to like slow down your mind and really think through things deeply. Like meditation can help with this. But
Mhm.
I find that I have this problem more and more. And I think it's exemplified by the fact that, like, when I was younger, like in my 20s, you know, not as much time on cell phones, scrolling, the dopamine thing, like ADHDing my brain. I read more than I do today. Like, I used to be a pretty voracious reader first, like, especially for like a poker player. Like, I read through the Dune series, all 6 novels. I read through the whole Game of Thrones series. I've read through a bunch of nonfiction books and whatever. And I feel like my rate of reading has gone down over time as my brain has been like ADHD'd. Some of it has to do with being able to find really good educational content on places like YouTube that probably didn't used to exist as well. But
Sure.
some of it's, I also know just by when I do read nowadays, sometimes it's harder to sit there and pay attention because I feel like it takes more dedicated focus to, like, say, sit there and read. And so why do I bring up this? I think it's because our brains like being in this rut of like dopamine fixes and this is what I'm doing today. And this is what I've already decided is important to me. And this is how I'm going to spend my time. And I think sometimes in order to like break out of that, maybe figure out what's really best for you, be more curious, read more, all these things that we're kind of talking about, it might take like slowing down a little bit, taking a moment. Like sometimes I find, for example, I like doing heat treatment, like in the sauna. Many times when I'm doing it, I listen to a podcast. But sometimes I like going in and not putting on a podcast, neither nothing or just like relaxing music and then letting my brain work. And then I start to find I have a bunch of really interesting thoughts, but I'm just letting myself slow down and take this like 20 minutes to think about whatever the fuck comes to my brain during that time. Right. And it's like, and one of the things I realized is like, I'm so addicted to like the like sending in thoughts like in a dump truck into my brain throughout the day. Like, like I'm listening to the podcast on 1.5 or 1.75x or whatever it is, and not giving my brain time to really think about anything other than the stuff that's being dumped in. And I just feel like some of these changes you want to make, you're probably more likely to make them if you just slow down, give yourself some time to breathe and think, and like let the thoughts come and be like, okay, I don't know, like you tell yourself you want to read, give yourself a few minutes to think about like, why is it that I want to read? Why is it that I want to learn? Why is learning poker on solvers actually going to be good for me and important to my life? And like, these type of questions, as opposed to just like ramrodding through everything that you do normally and like not giving much thought to why you're doing what you're doing.
No, I definitely agree with you. And I think, at least with my poker peers, I find very often it's one thing to the next task wise, just very achievement oriented. And I find that my happiest days typically, aside from sports, a big part of it is I put my headphones in, but I just put on like binaural beats or white noise, and it's just block, and I just have my thoughts while I walk. So often I autopilot. I listen to a lot of books, and granted, they're novels. I'm not, trying to like directly learn things usually, but still it blocks my own thinking. There's this kind of natural path to, same thing with music. I find music relaxing and I like it, but I don't have the same thoughts. Like, preparing for a podcast, for example, if I go for a walk and I have music in, I don't come up with any questions. It never turns into anything. If I want to think about poker, I can't think creatively while I have music on. There maybe is something if I play the same song on a loop, then it becomes this kind of white noise thing. But typically, if I want to think, and preparing for a podcast, I don't consider high level thinking. I need white noise. I just need to, just be in my brain alone.
Yeah, for sure. I do think that music is a tricky one. And there's such a wide range of music. There's music that I find I am able to think while I'm listening to it, and other music, there's no chance. I mean, one thing that's, I think, super important for me personally is like the music just can't have lyrics. Lyrics makes it almost impossible, or like meaningful lyrics. Like it could be some chant or something, but like it just can't be lyrics. That just grabs too much of the attention of my brain. So that for sure is a no-no for me in terms of thinking.
Definitely. So this summer you had a deep run in the main event. What place did you get?
I think I was the first one out at 3 tables, 27, I believe.
Okay. I want to talk about what goes into that as far as clearly there's a lot more than just typical strategy. You've got this changing player pool from day 1 and day 2 to what it looked like, on the day when you went out. I don't know if that's day 6, but you've got the task of dealing with probably not being as well slept as you'd like to be, the brain fry of just kind of thinking pretty high level, and you have a limited amount of time and bandwidth to devote. So it's not like, the November 9 where you've got 4 months to prepare and, do everything you can to get your own game sharp and your best reads on your opponent. I kind of want to hear what you did, along with what you might have changed if you could go back in terms of how you devoted this energy, how you approached trying to get to sleep, everything around a deep run in the main event.
Yeah. The main event, I think, is a very interesting tournament. And I think despite the fact that I'm probably was a relatively better player 10 years ago, I think I'm playing the main event much better today, probably have higher EV today, oddly enough. And it's mostly just due to like patience and taking the event seriously. I think like the idea to me 10 years ago of taking like 2 weeks during the World Series to play this tournament, it was kind of like, I'm either going to run up a big stack or just get back to the cash games. And I just feel like, I mean, it could have obviously worked out, but it kind of never did. And I think, I have a few hands from the past that is just like, wow, that was terrible. But like, I just think like since post COVID almost, it's like going into the main, I've been like, this is the place I want to be. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm giving 100% to this tournament. And I basically had my 2 deepest runs out of the 3 tournaments that have come since then. And I mean, obviously some of that is luck, but like, I know I'm playing the main way better. I will start with the thing that I wish I did better on this, which is the main is grueling, very grueling. And it was very hard to sleep. And going into day 4 to 5, 5 to 6, and 6 to 7, I believe I busted on day 7. I wasn't getting enough sleep because it's by the time it ends, and especially day 4 is the longest day of all because you add an extra hour from like the bubble because like, they're stopping the clock. And so the bubble, takes a whole extra hour. But like that night was even shorter than all the others by an hour. And it was just like, and I don't know what it was, but maybe I would have been a little bit better, but on each of those days, I was waking up like at least an hour early and kind of not able to go back to sleep. So I was not getting enough sleep. And actually by day 7, I could tell like on hand 1, I sit down and I play hand 1 and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm exhausted today. This is going to be a motherfucking problem. And I actually took like half of an Adderall XR because I'm like, okay, like I wanted to make it through the day. And it helped a lot during the day, but actually I think post dinner, I was already starting to crash again. And my bust out hand, which I think I did not like the way that I played it. I think I kind of butchered it. Honestly, I think if I wasn't exhausted, I'm pretty sure I don't fuck up. But, it is what it is. And that's the number one thing I'd want to figure out. And I think if I had to say, what am I going to do differently? One of the biggest problems is I wasn't eating enough during the day. So by the time I'd drive home, I'd spend the next, 40 minutes like preparing stuff to eat and eating at least 1,000 calories. Cause like, I'm a pretty big guy and I need like, even on days where I don't really work out, I need like 2,500 calories. So like, just for maintenance. So like I would eat that much, would then take time. I would get to bed a little bit later because also my unwind time, but then also adversely affect my sleep, kind of eating that much right before I'd go to bed. So I think the number one thing I'd make sure I do differently is make sure I ate more throughout the day so that when I go home, at most I'd have like bone broth and a light snack and then just go to bed quicker and really focus on trying to get like a solid 7 hours. That's number one thing I would do differently. Nothing to do with playing. It just has to do with like kind of figuring out the logistics of eating and sleeping so that I could maximize my sleep. Because that was huge. And it would really cost me on day 7, I think.
So I asked Ike a question about if he thinks that some players just perform better in really big spots than others. And he had a mixed bag answer. He said, yes, maybe not as much as it might appear, but you're one of those guys I think of as performing really well in big pots. And for me, I kind of chalk it up to having good ideas about who is and isn't capable of different things, kind of the work that happens way before that pot. Not necessarily that you're one of the few guys who can think through a spot when you're in it. It's more something to do with psychology and experience. And maybe this has to do with you having played in so many different variants and been around so long. But, maybe others would disagree, maybe even you disagree, but I have it in my head that you're one of the really great modern players when it comes to making big decisions with regard to, I'm not going to say just deviations, but hey, this guy was not playing these nodes on the early streets to bluff Brian Rast on the river, or quite the opposite. This guy is trying to make his mark on a big TV table, and he's going to overbluff in this spot. If you agree with my assessment, I'm curious what goes into this, if there's any way to kind of suss out, if you can explain where any of these instincts come from when it comes to sizing up tables, looking to understand different people and their game plans that are not so explicit. I find it to be, I'm not going to lie, I think I'm very good at this as well. I find it to be one of the most difficult things to coach. There's just, there's not this linear A to B game plan to kind of, transplant to people. I'm curious if you have anything there.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack and try to answer. I mean, first, I like the framing of this of like really what you're doing is a process of Bayesian analysis of like making inferences from limited information or data points, right? That's kind of the proper way to summarize that. And okay, so one thing I'd say, which is a little bit off of the technical aspect of it and more to the like what goes into just performing at when the lights are brightest and the pressure's really on. And I'd say kind of comes down to this. Like I've been a person since I was a child who just performs well under pressure. Like as a kid, I was a good test taker. Like I actually, I crushed school. I was valedictorian in my high school. I got all A's. I got into Stanford and Princeton and waitlisted at Harvard and MIT. I had a great high school career. At college, not so much. Didn't know what I wanted, found poker, etc. But it's like, I love taking tests. It's like homework was annoying. You had to do a bunch of shit at home. But like tests, I just listen in class, learn, and show up and like reproduce what I learned, Like, and it's just that mindset, I think, is the same mindset where it's like, okay, we play poker. There's a lot of hours we've played poker, right? Like, even when you're playing a tournament, these 3-day, 4-day tournaments, whatever, there's a lot of hours just in that one tournament, right? You're talking a 3-day tournament could be 30, 40 hours to get to the end. And it's like, that's a lot of time, even in just one. And now like take that over a whole series or something for you to deeply focus on something. And I think like something that most people kind of like I think people have different conceptions of, let's call it like F to A game poker than I do. Like I think too many people are what I'll call like too lax on what their requirement, their like requirement is of A game poker. Like I actually am a person who is a very good non-tilter. I developed that in my cash years. It was one of my strengths playing in Bobby's room or whatever, is like I think I tilted way less than my opponents. Not necessarily that my B game was always better. But like true A game poker is when it's like nothing outside of the table exists. You are not on your phone for 1 minute. You are watching every hand. You are trying to get every single piece of information you can about how people are playing, their bet sizing, how they're betting, any physical reads. And I can tell you, like when I'm truly on A game poker, I'm actually getting reads, even playing with great poker players, whether it's their timing, little things about discomfort or whatever. It happened at this 50K PPC final table in some spots, even against some of the really good players at that table. And the truth is that like that true A+ game poker, I just can't make myself do it all the time. Like most of the time, I'm just like, just play B game poker on day one of tournaments. And on day two, if I can do like A- poker, I'm like pretty happy with it, where I'm kind of there. I'm watching every hand. I'm not really engaging in conversation. I'm really bad at talking and playing at the same time. It fucks me up, so that's it. But then by like in the money playing down to the final table, like I can just get in A game poker mode. And like, honestly, it's like the pressure and the stakes that make that happen. It's kind of hard for me to like really play A+ game poker unless there's something on it. It's just I've been playing poker too long. And even from a sense of like, let's say the best example would be the World Series. Realistically, I can't make myself play A+ game poker day in and day out of like a 45-day series.
Sure.
I just like, it's too exhausting. So it's like you need to, go in and out of it and ramp up to doing it. But the truth is like probably the number one reason I perform the best is because I'm kind of a sick person who really needs the pressure to actually like be fully focused and in the moment. And I'm able to do that, I think, on a level that like many people don't, but you do see it's like people notice when like really good players do it. Like people like Chidwick, he's just always watching, like Ivy, always watching. Yeah, I mean, listen, when I'm on A game poker, I'm always watching. I'm always thinking.
Yeah, let me tell you my personal experience with this, because it's funny, as you were saying this, it was resonating with me. I can't remember exactly which tournaments we played together, but I can tell you that I didn't really like playing with you early on because I could tell you were really good at keeping your eyes on everything. And it meant I had to be more guarded. And I didn't love that. I was like, no, this guy is legit. This is not, I think there are some people who just kind of make it their thing to make sure they stare all the time. But if you look close enough, you can kind of see when they're a little bit zoned out. They're just kind of following protocol for them. And it's sometimes a protective mechanism too. And I could see it in you. I'm like, fuck, Brian is really paying attention. And I could tell you're a smart guy too before we'd ever really chatted. And I didn't like playing with you because I knew you were picking up on important things and I was going to have to guard myself. And then when I actually enjoyed playing with you was when you start talking, you're not paying attention at all. And I love it because you're very enjoyable to chat with and you're really bad at talking and paying good attention at the same time. So I was like, oh, it's a pleasure to play with and I don't have to have my guard up at all. And I like kind of talking at the table. Maybe actually for me, it's a little bit different. I'm not going to say I pay better attention when I'm talking, but it energizes me. If I'm in good conversation, it makes me want to focus a little more. But yeah, it is interesting because I do think a lot of people overblow their skills and not to flatter the guests too much, but I truly believe that you are really good at picking up on a lot of things when you put that focus in. And I know what you're talking about in terms of it's not the kind of thing you can do all the time. It costs a lot.
It does. And I even, when I'm going into a tournament on like day ones, I'll allow myself to talk with people. Like it's fun. I'm seeing a bunch of people I don't get to interact with very often. I oftentimes like them, and I'm sort of okay at this point when the stakes are small in the tournament, unless it's like a really big buy-in, but I'm sort of okay, like I'm not going to be playing. This is like B game poker. I engage in some conversation, not when I'm in a hand, but like I'm not picking up on everything, and I'll be okay with that. And it's just kind of, that changes as the tournament moves on or whatever. But yeah, I think it's, but so I'd say like that's probably number one. And I do think that there are just people that this applies to kind of push back on the idea maybe presented by Ike, who I just think there are people that for whatever reason in the way that they're wired do end up performing better. It's like, probably people who the pressure doesn't affect very much, people who end up performing better, and people who end up performing worse. And, there's a spectrum with it, just like many things in life. It's not a binary thing. And so I think you see that playing out at different times. And especially like I'm probably a guy who, especially at this point in my career, maybe there is as you even notice, like a pretty marked difference if I show up at the table and I'm chatting and you're like, yeah, he's not paying attention, versus like you catch me on like late day 2 of a tournament and all of a sudden I probably have my music in and it's like a very different vibe. Like I'm watching hands and whatever, and I'm not like talking, and like it's so that ends up being probably a lot more noticeable in somebody like me than there are guys who show up and on day 1 they're a bit more focused, oftentimes even then. So not saying they're not necessarily, but the delta is less, right? So that's definitely one thing. And I do think, oh shoot, I was going to say something else, but I forgot. So
I mean, I'll put it this way. I think, what I understand it to be is that some people's C game is going to be equivalent to some people's A game. That's pretty obvious. And if you have those players on day 1, they appear to be the same, the C game versus the A game. And then they get to day 3 and the guy with his C game is now playing his A game. That's far superior to the other guy's A game. He doesn't have anywhere to graduate to.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing I was going to say, which is more on the technical side of it, is that so I think like as you're going, especially even like in the same tournament, playing with people, is there's a bit of a vibe of how somebody's playing. Not always, but sometimes it also matters on what type of player they are. And I think it develops like when you're really in the zone, in the groove, you get a good idea about how you're going to respond against this person, adjustments, pre-adjustments, that whole thing. And I think that as the tournament goes on, or even in a cash session, like especially back in the day, as like time goes on, it's like some of the ways that you can end up making a bunch of money by like just being right about that more often than you're wrong as it goes on in like bigger spots, and you're sort of correct in your assessment about how someone's playing, your adjustments or your pre-adjustments, and it can make a huge difference. Like to kind of get away from the tournament thing, I can tell you back in the day, one of my huge strengths in cash was like when I was younger, I had animal endurance. And this was super useful in Macau because sometimes there'd be these like knockdown, drag out cash game sessions that would go 20, 30, 40 hours like regularly. And like not that many people would get up. And it's like, dude, there's a lot of people that by hour 10, hour 12, hour 15, like they're tired. And like when they're tired, their game goes into like ABC. I'm really not going to try to do anything complicated here. We're here because of the fish. I'm going to just try to like make a big hand or whatever, like, and play against the fish. And it's like, that was all of a sudden time, like 15 hours in, fucking animal comes out. It's time to just like, take advantage of the table right now and turn it on. So it's like, I'd sit there and play like good poker, but not be like crazy or whatever. And it just kind of stay. And then once I notice, it's like, oh, people are tired. People are weak. Just open more pots. Like, go for it. It's like, try to get in these spots where I'm now flatting the VIP with garbage just to like play a pot, or like opening his big blind with like nonsense. And even though maybe if the pro was sitting there and really figured out that my like VPIP is super high in the spot, they're just too fucking tired to do anything. They don't give a shit anymore. They're just like playing ABC and moving on. Whereas in like 5 hours in the session, if they noticed me doing that, they'd 3-bet me. Like they'd fuck with me because they're like, you just have garbage. You're not gonna be able to do anything. But 15 hours in the session, they're just like, fucking go for it, dude. Like, I don't care anymore. So it's just, 25 hours into the session, whatever it is. So, there's just all kinds of like little things like that, like almost as time in whatever you're doing goes on, it's just like your ability as a gamesman to like make these reads, make these adjustments, just like increases, right? Whether it's at cash or tournaments. And if you're right, in tournaments especially, it's for even more money because it's like later on in the tournament, right? With more time to get the reads and for more money because it's worth more. So I don't know. I just like think I'm kind of a naturally good games player who's good at this kind of like rock, paper, scissors, like what am I going to do to win here analysis, in addition to being extra good under pressure. So I think that's kind of where it's sifted out for me.
Yeah, I would take that first part, not necessarily the under pressure part, but being good at games. I would just separate it between knowledge and wisdom. And wisdom has to be acquired over time, and you've put in the time and in all these different variants, and even pre-poker, no doubt, just being interested in games. And then obviously there's just a predisposition there to begin with. But that's the thing, that knowledge is very easy to compare. You can just say like, who understands the 3-betting range at 35 big blinds, button versus low jack better, and that's a knowledge thing. But comparing wisdom is really difficult because it's very subjective. It's not going to appear on a chart, and therefore I think it doesn't get nearly enough credit, especially in modern poker tournaments.
Yeah, and I don't think, I think there are definitely other people who have this set of attributes, but it's something that just exists out there, and I don't know, I can't advice in terms of, oh shit, it's going to happen while we're on this podcast. I don't know if there's any advice I can give. I'm just my Presolver just went off. Bitcoin's at 99,700, so the 100K.
Wow!
Fucking roll, it could be coming.
The century mark. Holy moly!
Okay, but yeah, no. So anyway, I think we kind of wrapped up this topic a little bit. But yeah.
A segment I did for the first time with Alex Kuleb a few podcasts ago. I want to bring it back, which is hit you with some random quotes and hear you riff on them. I want to hear Rasty talk about some famous quotes. Give me a number 1 to 12.
3.
3. Be who you are. Say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind.
I'm familiar with this quote.
True, bullshit. What'd you say?
I'm familiar with this quote. I'm pretty sure I've tweeted it and put it on my Instagram before. Yeah.
He likes it.
So repeat it again. I just want to listen to it again.
Yeah.
Be what you are, so what you feel, because people who mind don't matter, and people that matter don't mind, right? Yeah. This quote is just speaking truth. That's it. I mean, this, be who you are, say what you feel is what you should do, and they give you the reason why in a very nice little rhyme, because people who matter don't mind, and the people who mind don't matter.
All right.
It's self-explanatory.
I can't take full agreement. I'm a natural arguer, so let me push back a little bit.
Sure, push back.
We have to qualify. I mean, say what you feel. Civilization is built on filters. We have to filter ourselves to some degree, right? And even people who love you, they don't want to hear everything that comes out of your fucking brain. Like, it can be a little much. How do we temper that?
Okay, so we have, this quote is like a limerick in length, or it's very short. So sure. The quote is trying to espouse a state of mind, or like a general philosophy. It is clear that there are going to be exceptions. It's not saying, be who you are and say what you feel 100% of the time. If it had said 100% of the time, but it's basically,
Yeah. I always have it in my head. I was trying to play devil's advocate here, is I think there's kind of that teenage early 20s phase that people go through where they're like, everyone's fake. I'm the only person who says it like it really is. And I'm like, no, having a filter is hugely fucking important, and don't 100% be yourself. That's insane.
It is. But it's the thing is, I think the problem exists more often the other way, where people are scared to say what they really think and be who they truly are. And I think this quote is trying to speak to saying that's okay. And the reason why is because the people that matter will be okay with you, and the people that don't are the ones that are going to judge you, without knowing. And yes, there's always exceptions. Nothing's ever true. You eat too much food, you get fat. You drink too much water, you die. Doesn't mean you shouldn't eat and shouldn't drink, So that's
I think it's largely true in what we might call sane society, but I think to the extreme, you're seeing schizophrenics and people with very, very difficult problems who are kind of the truest representation of this quote. And I'm going to go with 8 out of 10 agreement over here.
Okay.
All right, give me another number.
1
to 12, not 3.
12.
12. When one door of happiness closes, another opens, but often we look so long at the closed door that we do not see the one that has been opened for us.
Yeah, I think this quote speaks to like the very real idea in life that, like, another quote would be the grass is always greener on the other side. And but it's a little bit different than that. It's a little bit more specific, with the idea being that, in life, sometimes a door closes. What does that mean? That means like something's over, whether it's a relationship, an opportunity, a job, could be much smaller than that. But, something ends, and that was something that maybe we had considered to be a path to happiness for ourselves. But the quote's also reminding you that usually when that happens, there is another door, another path that's open. And we get so fixated on the thing that had previously been in our sights that we're unable to perhaps let go of it, like unattach, and see the new thing that, by the way, is probably very, like, not even probably, will definitely be able to make us happy. And one of the ways that I would say I feel like this quote is very true, and something that I definitely believe and found in my life, is that like I found that it's like I don't really need a lot to make me happy. Oftentimes it's very simple things like getting a good workout, or playing a sport, or dancing to music that I really like, or watching a program, or taking a walk with my wife, or hanging out with my friends. And these are, the list can go on. And many of these things require very little investment of money or anything. And just, it's kind of like, if certain things happen in life where this thing doesn't work out for me, I don't win this tournament, whatever door closes, it's like there's another path to happiness that's always going to be available. Like, that'll be kind of just as good. Like, my life will be okay. Like, even on a different sense, it's like I've done pretty well. I've like made a bunch of money in my life, and that's awesome. It allows me a certain level of like freedom and access to things, and security and whatever. And I appreciate that. But then it's like, I've always had this thought, like, what if, Bitcoin just went to zero tomorrow, or I lost this, or something happened? And it'd be like, you know what? I mean, it would suck. And it's kind of that feeling of where you had something and lost it is kind of worse than not having it. But
Sure.
It'd be like, I'll be okay. Like, It doesn't take that much to make me happy. And it's true, like, the material things are nice, but like I can be happy without them. So I think this quote kind of like touches on that aspect of happiness, and like really how there's something else that's always available. And oftentimes it's almost like that Buddhist idea of like suffering comes from attachment. And our problem is that we're attached to the door that's closed, as opposed to the other door and path that's open. That's my interpretation of it.
We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit.
Aristotle, right?
Very nice.
Yeah, I think this quote is a little bit like medicine. It's like, it's that thing that you listen to it and you realize that there's a lot of wisdom embedded in this, but that it's not the easiest one to understand. It's like about having kind of some discipline in your life of like being excellent isn't about just doing something once. It's the habit, right?
How about not winning a poker tournament is not excellence. Excellence is continually playing well hand after hand.
Sure. Yeah. From the poker perspective, it fits very well, and into the like, let's not be results oriented, but more about like, what's the actual quality of your play, but also just, achieving that excellence in anything in life, right? Like, what is it? It's like hard work beats whatever 100% of the time, or so, like hard work beats talent, or it just, excellence is a habit. Like, no one is excellent at anything unless they do it repeatedly. I don't know, like this quote to me is another great quote, and I really agree with what it has to say. And I think the little lazy bone inside of us maybe doesn't always want to hear it, but yeah, it's like medicine.
There's that approach that we love the idea of something can happen at the snap of the fingers and you can just be excellent. I think in some senses that's the appeal of poker is you don't actually have to get good to have a crown put on your head from time to time.
I even think there's like the kind of derivative idea of this quote, which is the second part. It's like, so repeat the second part of the quote again.
Yeah. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. You're good.
I had a good thought, but hold on. Let me take another like 30 seconds to see if I can think of this.
Yeah, take your time. You're good.
Yeah, I can't remember. It's okay.
So you are familiar, and you may be one of my first guests who is prepared for my final question. Can I get 3 recommendations of any kind, please?
Okay, I kind of have it down to 3 categories. And okay. I might go over the strict 3. But
I'm good with it. We want more Czar Rast.
Okay. Thank you, Jaffe. All right. So the fun category, I'm watching the 2nd season of it and I'm kind of enjoying it. You know, I like some anime here and there, and Arcane is this anime. It's out on Netflix. Season 1 was great. Season 2's been pretty good so far. It's fun. It's not going to do too much deep thinking, but very well done. And I think pretty cool. It's like, I guess it's based off a game, League of Legends, which I've never played and have no idea what that's about. And I don't think you need to in order to enjoy it. Second thing, from a more dramatic standpoint, it's this series. I can't remember where it's on, but you could look it up. Maybe it's Amazon Prime. It's called Dope Sick. Dope Sick is about it's kind of like the characters in it are mostly fictionalized, although there are a few people that are based on are real life characters, but it's about the opioid crisis. And it's very well done. And it's something very sad that happened. It's something kind of very sick that's really an indictment on the way the FDA and politics works, and just it does a very good job of kind of creating characters and situations that let you realize how this has played out and impacted people in real life. And like, you know, I even, without getting specific, I've had stories now. Part of the way the series was recommended to me was at a dinner where somebody who I know and am friends with actually had something happen with, you know, someone he's related to. That's like super sad. So it's not just like the stuff in this series is like some overly dramatized thing, but I think the dramatic personalization of the stories really helps hit home how crazy what happened is, and sort of how evil what the Sacklers did in this instance was. So I think Dope Sick, super recommend it. And then from the thinking side of things, I have a recommendation. It's more this guy, Rupert Sheldrake. There was this paper and podcast that were recommended to me. The paper is like a short 17-page paper called Is the Sun Conscious? It was like super interesting. Kind of discusses like the electromagnetic theory of consciousness and then applying things to how we think about the sun. I then also watched a podcast the same person sent me called Meet the Scientist, banned by TED Talks on YouTube, with Jesse Michaels or Michelle's as the interviewer. And this guy is just clearly a very kind of like free thinker who, you know, he's a PhD, he's a scientist, but he enjoys exploring kind of non-traditional vectors of thought, but does it in a very interesting way. And I found his exploration and discussions to be like extremely interesting and gratifying. And I think we have, you know, I think it's okay sometimes to go out of orthodoxy. I think we need to realize that like our understanding of the universe is quite limited. I mean, we literally, our current understandings of like physics are that 98% of the matter and energy of the universe. We have no fucking idea what it is. So we call it dark matter and dark energy.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, there's probably going to be some explanations also, just like gravity doesn't work with, the rest of our understanding of electromagnetics and in terms of forces. And there's a lot of discussions about why that might be. And, this just plays out in a bunch of different, areas of knowledge that we have. And I just think we should be open to exploring kind of like different explanations. And by the way, some of this is actually super interesting. Like if you think about it's like, what if stars are almost like cells, and like the way galaxies are connected are almost like neurons. And I think anyone that's looked at like a map of the physical or the known universe, that we can see, the observable universe rather, are like almost struck how it looks a little bit like neurons in a brain. And so like, is the universe at large conscious in some way? I just think there's very interesting ideas, and this gets almost into like potential scientific explanations about why that might be the case based on the electromagnetic understanding of consciousness. So that's something I would recommend. It's very interesting. And I'll say the fourth thing would be one of the next books I'm planning on reading is Yanofsky's The Outer Limits of Reason, which is the exploration of problems and concepts which are inherently unknowable to us. And I think this idea that it's like, with time, humans will figure everything out. And this book is actually like a philosophical, scientific, logical exploration of what things are theoretically impossible for us to know, right? Such as the P equals NP theory of completeness and incompleteness, rather. So yeah, so that's a book where actually like 7 years ago, I read like half of it and kind of stopped due to just getting out of it. And I want to read it again. It was a very interesting, good book. So those are my things.
Excellent. I'm going to check some of those out. The theory you presented and the third recommendation, that's completely new to me. I kind of want to hear about that.
Listen, you can read the paper. It will be under an hour. Like, it's a kind of short, enjoyable read, maybe even depending on how fast you read, 30 minutes. Super fun. Is the Sun Conscious? Rupert Sheldrake.
Excellent.
And if you like
Brian
that,
Rast.
listen to the podcast.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll do that. Brian Rast, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been fun.